Thursday morning, friends. I'm Ben Hayes, pastor of First Baptist Church, Dadeville, Alabama, bringing you our thought for the day today. And I'm so glad you've chosen to spend a few moments with us as we look into God's Word and find some of the wisdom that He has for us. Wise King Solomon had a lot to say about a lot of different topics, and today we're going to be looking at one of those topics. If you want to follow along with us, we're going to be once again in Proverbs chapter 22. Down towards the end of that chapter, verse 28, he says very simply, "Do not remove the ancient landmark which your fathers have set." And if you will think about that, throughout the Old Testament, there were many of those landmarks that were put up in different places. Abraham did it, Isaac did it, Jacob did it, Moses did it, Joshua did it. All through the Old Testament, you see where the children of Israel would gather stones and they would set up markers. And that's the landmarks that we're talking about here. And one of the things that you have to understand about these landmarks is that each one of them represented something significant about the journey of the people of God, about the life that they were living, about what God was going to do in their lives. If you've ever gone through Dr. Henry Blackaby's Experiencing God, you see that as he talks about the importance of spiritual markers in our lives. And he bases it on these landmarks that we see in the Old Testament. And there are significant events that happen to us. Now think about this. As you go back over your life, you remember those significant events, your salvation experience, your marriage, the birth of your children, illnesses, special things that God has done for you, reminders of His presence. And the concept here is that you look back at those spiritual markers and you see the path that God has been marking out for you. And in knowing from where you've come, you can see to where He's taking you. That's the importance of these landmarks that King Solomon is talking about. Now, the danger, he's talking about not just the physical landmarks here, he's talking about the spiritual significance of these landmarks. Because the danger is when we move those, we lose sight of what God is trying to teach us, what God is trying to tell us about ourselves, about where we've been, and about where we're going. And that's why he says, don't remove the ancient landmark which your fathers have set. You ever thought about this concept of boundaries? I can remember when my dad and mom moved back up to Kentucky, they bought some property up there, and when they bought the property, they had it surveyed. A guy came in and he put the pins in the corners of the property and had it all marked off. And I'll never forget one day I was talking to my dad, and he was telling me about his old neighbor who had lived next in the land next to him for all of his life. And he said that one day that guy came up there, saw those pins, and just pulled them up. Pulled them up. He said, "No, this is my property. You don't own this. This is my property. My property goes over here." He literally removed the boundary marker, the landmark, because he believed that he owned more land than he actually did. And so many times in our lives, we do that spiritually. We remove the boundary marker, and so we find ourselves straying into areas where we shouldn't be, doing things that we shouldn't do. And it's important that we remember that God has set those boundaries for a reason. That's the reason He gave us the Ten Commandments, not so that He could prove that we could do what needs to be done to be saved, but so that He could show us that we could never do what we need to do to be saved. Those boundaries are there, and we constantly plow right through them. It's almost as if we don't even see them. And we do things that we want to do, the way that we want to do them, with the attitude that we want to have as we do them. And all the while, we're just plucking up the landmarks. God says, don't do that. See the landmarks and stop where you're supposed to stop. Follow the path that I've laid out for you. And you know, the truth is that that's where joy comes from. Joy comes from obedience to the Father and following the path that He has for us. I often talk about the fact that God has a divine will and God has a permissive will. His divine will is exactly what He would have us to do. Here's the problem. You and I never accomplished that. We never reached that perfect goal. We never followed that path perfectly. And so what comes into play then is God's permissive will, because He's given us the right and the ability to choose. And many times we choose the wrong thing. So while God's divine will is up here, His permissive will is down here, because it is not what His perfect plan is for our lives. And so what happens is we'll be heading towards that divine will and we'll stumble, and all of a sudden we'll be heading off in a different direction. But He gives us those abilities to choose again, and we may head back. But God allows us to make those decisions so that we can grow and become stronger and recognize more about who He is and about who we are. But the struggle is to find God's perfect will, His divine will for your life, and to follow it. So remember, don't remove the ancient landmarks that the fathers have placed there. Keep them where they need to be so that God can guide you to where He wants you to be. I hope that you have a great Thursday today. Be blessed.